So just that was a technical introduction, just to let you know that today's webinar is about the many ways in which you as a service provider can stay in the loop, and especially on top of policy and program changes in the area of refugee and immigration issues. So I just want to clarify at this point, for anyone who has joined thinking that I will be giving updates, that that's not the case. So this webinar is not actually about recent changes in immigration and refugee policy or programs. It's about how you can be the receiver of that sort of information rather than, go on the internet and search for it, that you will receive it directly. So this is about how some best practices, some main sources of information that are credible and that you may want to be connected with, rather than the actual changes and the actual information. Okay, so if you were hoping or expecting to hear news and information about actual changes, this is the RCP, for example, does webinars on that, and other organizations as well, but that won't be covered in today's webinar. So to begin, I'll be looking over some different kinds of information sources with you. I'll be reviewing with you the listservs and newsletters and e-blasts, but also I'll be going over some key contact information. So some key emails, key persons that you might want to know of that you may or may not already be aware of. And at the end, we do have enough time in this webinar to where I would like to invite you to share some of the resources and sources of information that you find very helpful to you in your everyday work that I may not have covered. So this is also a practice sharing sort of webinar. And keeping up with changes in program and policy can be a challenge, especially when you're managing a high caseload as a frontline service provider. And I fully recognize that the amount of resources that I'm presenting here today can be overwhelming. So by no means am I suggesting that you sign up for all of them, especially when you're trying to get a good handle on your caseload and all of the other demands on a job. The last thing you need is to get information overload. So the purpose of today's webinar is to support your work by identifying how you can keep up with changes and without spending too much time searching for it. So I recommend that you first identify what it is that you need to know, depending on your clientele and the job description you have, how often you want to receive that type of information, and then match that with one or two of the resources that we're going to review here today. So be selective. And having said that, let's start looking at some of the resources that you might find helpful. So the one that I would really recommend is to get on the listserv for the Canadian Council for Refugees. So most organizations in Ontario that serve newcomers and immigrants and refugees already are members, or already a member of the CCR. So that means that top management and your director probably gets a newsletter. Staff may or may not be invited to the CCR consultations, which happen 4 times a year. But even if your organization is not a member of the CCR and you as an individual want to receive information, you can certainly do that. So you would go to the link I have here on the slide. That's the listserv, and it's a national listserv. So you will receive, you will see messages from people all over Canada, not just from Ontario. So the information that is shared on here is usually information that is relevant to people across Canada, not just in Ontario. So they will be mostly matters on refugee advocacy, refugee law, refugee policy and program, which is federal jurisdiction, right? So it would be information that pertains to everyone in Canada. A lot of the focus on the information that's shared on this listserv is on policy changes, but they also share a very comprehensive media scan every day, and there are many case questions that are sent to the list, as long as, like I said before, it's relevant to everyone across Canada. A warning though, this is for people who have time, because on average, there are about 5 or more messages that are sent every day. So this is a high traffic listserv. If you want, you can also receive a digest at the end of the day or end of the week. But this is a very busy listserv, Some people have another email address that they use just for this listserv. If you're not very highly active in advocacy, or you don't have the time to sort through that sort of volume of messages, this may not be necessarily for you. But this is the main, since the CCR is the main body of refugee advocacy in Canada, this is a very good source of information as well. The other listserv that you may want to sign up for is the one run by the Refugee Sponsorship Training Program. And the listserv focuses not on all types of refugees, but specifically on the PSR program, so the Private Sponsorship of Refugees program, the Blended Visa Office Referred program, but not the Government-Assisted Refugee program. Okay, so this is a nationwide listserv as well, so anyone can sign up for it. Anyone interested in refugee sponsorship, no matter what type of role you play within that context. The type of information that's shared is usually by a member of the RCP team, a staff member. They will send out in a timely fashion policy and program updates by the government. So any changes related to the PSR program, any events, and also training opportunities. This listserv is not very busy actually, so you will not see a lot of discussion on there, even though anyone can really post questions and answers to this list, but it's not very busy. And you would, if you want to sign up for it, you would go to rcp.ca, you scroll down on the page until you reach the bottom where there is a form that you have to fill out. So again, this is compared to the CCR listserv, not a very high traffic sort of listserv. And for those who are not familiar with listserv, this is information that is based on your email, right? So it comes to your email inbox, depending on which email you use to sign up for it. And finally, if you want to receive information directly from the federal government, from the Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada IRCC department, there are two ways to do that. So I have the website addresses here for you. One is the newsroom email subscription. This is for any notification where the IRCC has published a news release or a statement, so it's very official, and any public, sort of notification is sent to your email if you subscribe for it. And then there's also the IRCC newsletter subscription. This is a little bit more broad, but you would receive an email notification whenever there are changes in immigration and refugee policy and services. Now you might ask, what's the difference and why should I sign up for the RCP listserv, for example? The difference is that sometimes the RCP receives information that isn't necessarily published as widely, right? So they will be able to provide you with more changes, I would say, and they can also break it down and explain and answer questions. Whereas the IRCC is simply a newsletter subscription, it's not a listserv view, so you can't write back and ask any questions. At OCASI, we also have several ways in which you can stay up to date. So the difference now, of course, is that OCASI focuses on Ontario. So people who are interested in more specific information because you work in Ontario, this may be, the place for you. OCASI, for those who don't know, is the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants. And we have a monthly e-newsletter with information about the sector, anything related to the settlement sector, basically. Any program, any updates from member agencies are also published. And this is not a listserv, this is a newsletter, so it's something that will be sent to your email address, and it's called In the Field. Again, even if your management or director has signed up for it, that's you're still free to sign up for it on your own as well. And the link to that is here on the slide. And I will be making the slides available to you by posting a link to it on the wiki page, and that will be in the follow-up email as well. We also have a Settlement.Org newsletter, so this is a little bit more frontline focused. It's a bi-weekly newsletter with information again, about the sector, any news in the settlement sector, events, jobs, requests for proposals, and more will be on there. The good thing, I think, for the Settlement.Org newsletter is especially, and the strength is that it collects all of everything that's going on in the sector in Ontario. So again, you don't have to search the internet. It is all focused here for you, especially if you're interested in events and professional development. There are lots of things that are happening in the sector, not necessarily organized by OCASI, but by other member agencies that are shared through this newsletter. And of course, if you're social media savvy and you're on Twitter, that is the best way to stay up to date in a timely fashion on policy and program changes. So we have especially 2 Twitter handles that are very relevant for this. We have more, but the @OCASI_policy and @Settlement_org are 2 social media or Twitter handles that send out information, especially on updates with policy and program changes. In Ontario, we also have the local immigration partnerships, and many of you will have heard about this, and maybe your organizations are part of the LIPs. The LIPs meet often. They're a community-based partnership project that involves diverse service providers and stakeholders and newcomers in the planning and development of collaborative and innovative solutions. They're focused to enhance settlement for newcomers. Most of them have an email-based newsletter that you can sign up for. I don't have any direct links here because depending on where you work, there are different local immigration partnerships. So they have different websites, and I have some of the logos here. You can see there's the Windsor Essex Local Immigration Partnership, the Hamilton, the Guelph one, there's the Toronto East Quadrant, there's Ottawa Local, but there are many more as well across Ontario. There is a link that I have on a slide here, which leads you to a full listing of all of the LIPs in Ontario. So you can search which one which one your organization falls into in terms of jurisdiction or area. And you can look up that website and contact them or see if there's a form where you can sign up for their newsletter. This is especially good for collaborative news about collaborative efforts in a community, of job fairs, of different things that are being done on the ground in terms of programs for newcomers, including refugees. The individual links you will be finding on their websites. A lot of them, if they don't have an email list, they might have a newsletter as well, with information that affects the local community in terms of immigration and refugee policy. So I'm just going to shift gears and so we've covered some of the key subscriptions and listservs, but I just wanted to show you also some other useful contacts. So many, there are many contacts that can be useful, but for the purpose of this webinar, we've narrowed the list down to those whose contact information might be harder to find, in the hopes to save you some time and make service provision smoother. Can everyone hear me? Sorry, I just wanted to do a test because can someone write to me that they can hear me? Hello? Okay, I'm glad that you can. Thank you. So I think one person just couldn't hear me. I'm glad that the rest of you can hear me. Thank you so much for answering. Thank you. So I'm just going to continue with the IFH. For sure, many of you have had some contact with it or some questions, particularly from recently resettled refugees who are covered by IFH, the theory. Sometimes people have questions around what sort of medication is covered, which isn't, or how to get a referral to dental care, what sort of dental care is covered, and so on. So there are inquiries that you can send inquiries to this particular email address you see here on the screen, the ifh-pfsi@cac.gc.ca. So you notice at the email handle, this is not an email address from Medivy, which is the provider of the IFH program. it is actually an inbox sitting with the IRCC. And I have confirmed with them that it is okay for service providers to use this email address as well. So it's not widely publicized, this email address, but it's an inbox that's used. Often sponsorship agreement holders use it when they have a question. So you just want to make sure that if you contact them at this inbox, that you make sure that the information isn't already available on the website. So make sure that it's not about how to fill out the application, or it's not covered by the summary of coverage webpage, which I have linked here as well, or the IFH Q&A. So just make sure that you've looked for the information, because it's an inbox that gets a lot of information. It's better not to fill it unnecessarily, but certainly if you're stuck and you really have a question or a dilemma for your client, you can write to this inbox for sure. Some people have asked us about how to know whether a service provider, a medical or healthcare service provider, is actually registered with the IFH. So the link is there as well for you to check if they're on that list or not. If a healthcare service provider wants to get registered as an IFH service provider or has a question, they should really be contacting Medavie Blue Cross directly. So I don't have that information here, because that's something that you as a service provider can do. So anything to do with invoicing or asking or getting a quote or things like that, actually the healthcare provider has to do that directly, and they need to contact Medavie Blue Cross. But everyone else won't be able to get much information from them. So this is a better place to start, this email inbox. So if you or your clients have any questions around a refugee sponsorship application, these are the key websites to check. So when it's about processing times, at what point, if you want to know where the processing is at for a particular file, the first link takes you to the average processing times website. So that gets updated every few months. And then you also have the ECAS system. And I know the ECAS, the electronic client application system, isn't necessarily very, very detailed, or perhaps it says in process, but many months have passed and you want to know a little bit more information, or you think the average processing time has passed. You can also use this inbox. Again, this is a cac.gc.ca website. Email address. So that's with the federal government. But just please note that any processing time increase must be sent to the IRCC inbox by the sponsor. And so this email is here for your reference, but because you are not the sponsor on the client's form, it's the sponsor that has to make that send that email. If the sponsor is your client and you're actually assisting them in completing or submitting an application, or finding out more information about an application that they've submitted already, you can certainly help them, but it has to be from in their name, right? And this can only be done if the application is still in Canada. So this email inbox can only be used by sponsors, and only if the application is still in Canada. If it's overseas, the sponsor has to submit a case-specific inquiry form to the responsible visa office to inquire on the status of the application. So that means they have to go to the website of the visa office. So if someone is sponsoring, for example, someone who's currently in Sudan, the visa office responsible would be Rome. So you would find on the Rome visa office website their inbox, and they would send it. They would fill out the form on that website. The specific issues or concerns inbox you see here at the bottom of the slide, so the PSR-PPR@cac.gc.ca. This is another email inbox. This is for case-specific questions that can't be answered through the IRCC website or the Refugee Sponsorship Training Program. So this is not necessarily about processing times, as I have above. This is really about issues that where there's no other information available, and really there's a serious concern or an issue, and the refugee sponsorship training program can't help. For example, if you are in Ontario and your clients or the sponsors are in Ontario, they can contact Ontario sponsors at rcp.ca. So you would specifically be contacting the Refugee Sponsorship Training Program's Ontario department, and they can really help you clarify a lot of the questions, a lot of the issues. So just give them a call. If you don't hear back, just give them a call again or leave them a voicemail. And this email as well is opened by anyone that works on the Ontario issues. So again, if they can't answer your questions, then you may want to use the psr-pr@cac.gc.ca. The second from the bottom, the email inbox here, where I've written practical support with forms, this is the Refugee Sponsorship Support Program. Some of you who joined our webinar last week would have heard Kelsey Lange speak about this program. This is a program run by lawyers. They provide pro bono support to refugee sponsorship groups on completing their forms. So if you have clients who really are stuck or who need some heavy support actually completing the forms, this program can help. It's free, and even though it's the center or the coordinating office sits at the University of Ottawa, they do have a chapter in Toronto or the GTA and other places as well. So you may want to contact them and find out, depending on where you are, if your clients can get help with that. I know some settlement agencies have been asked not to complete forms, or the settlement councils are not allowed to complete forms. So this may be an alternative solution for your clients. So again, if you later have a question about this, I can come back to the slide. In terms of any refugee sponsorship conflict or dispute or breakdown, at OCASI, we've been receiving some questions about this as well. It's not always very clear cut on what to do when you're a service provider and you're supporting your clients who are either have been sponsored or perhaps are sponsors themselves. The Refugee Sponsorship Training Program has some resources that might interest you as a frontline worker. It's on the website at RCP under the resources section. One of them is this info sheet that clarifies the difference between a conflict, a dispute, and a sponsorship breakdown in the context of a refugee sponsorship, because they're very different things in terms of how they will be dealt with. So that's the link you see here on the info sheet. However, if you've tried to mediate and support your client, but the dispute or conflict hasn't resolved, or a sponsorship breakdown is in process or has already occurred, or you find out that your client hasn't been receiving any support from the sponsors, you can contact the IRCC at the email address here. And you can see it's ircc.psr-case-review-reviewthecase.ircc@cac.gc.ca. They have a small team dedicated to mediating such situations, and they'll respond to this PSR case review inbox. So this inbox isn't all about conflict, but they have people that will pass it on to the small team that deals with that. And you might want to refer your client to this if there is a concern that they are not receiving any financial support, even though they have been sponsored and should be receiving it, or that there's a serious dispute that could be leading towards this breakdown, and an actual breakdown. For example, your client has moved, or the sponsors have moved, and now but it's in the middle of the sponsorship and there's nobody to look out for the sponsored refugees, and you can't solve this dilemma. So by bringing this to the IRCC, what will happen is the team there will review what's going on and try to mediate and try to find the solution. But definitely sponsors will be held responsible, and they also will have a chance to explain from their point of view of what happened, and so will the sponsored refugee. But by no means does this mean that the sponsorship will end and the refugees will be sent home, because that's a lot of times what sponsored refugees are afraid of and may not speak up. So if they've confided in you as a frontline worker that they're not receiving any support or any financial monthly support, and they're afraid to speak up, you can inform them that this is also this is a resource that's available to them and to you as well. So fraud in the context of refugee sponsorship seems to be increasing, unfortunately. And by fraud in this context, I'm referring to incidences where, for example, Canadians ask the refugees to transfer funds to them as a condition for the sponsorship, or an organization or person poses as a sponsorship agreement holder, and they're not, or an organization that takes money from refugees abroad and promises to match them with sponsors in Canada. So all of these should really raise red flags. Under the rules of the Canadian Refugee Sponsorship Program, sponsoring groups are not allowed to ask for any funds from the refugees other than $100 from co-sponsors, even if the refugees have the funds. So if the refugees are able to move with some capital or move their funds, that's fine, but the Canadian group here still has to have their money in place to sponsor them, so to support them. And this is so that vulnerable people aren't being taken advantage of, and also in case once they do actually come to Canada and they couldn't bring the money, or for whatever reason they don't have the money, that they still have that as a backup. If they come here with their own money and the group and they can contribute towards their own income, that's fine. The group doesn't have to spend it, but the group does have to have the money and cannot ask the refugee for their money in advance. And just as a reminder, refugees do not have to pay for a private sponsorship. They also don't need to repay or prepay their sponsors for any care, lodging, or settlement assistance. So no one can promise a sponsorship application will get special treatment or guarantee that it will be approved in any way. So if you're not sure if an organization is truly a sponsorship agreement holder or a SA, you can check the IRCC's website, or you can contact the RSTP, the Refugee Sponsorship Training Program, because they have an ongoing list of current sponsorship agreement holder organizations. Another example of a scam would be fraudulent immigration websites or calls from an immigration officer saying that they will be removed or returned to their country if they don't pay a certain amount, those sorts of scams. Or a charity scam could be that a client finds out that they have been giving money to an organization that poses as a charity but isn't actually a charity. So all of these sort of suspected scams or frauds, these are some places to report it to. You can contact the police or the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. The number is there, the email is there as well. And for charity scams, you will have to call the Canada Revenue Agency at the number on this slide here. So those are sort of the key resources that we had collected to share with you. But like I said earlier, there may be other resources or sources of information that you have accessed that have helped you stay informed that I haven't covered and that you think are very useful. So at this point, feel free to type them and I will read them out, or use the hand icon so I can unmute you and you can share it. The other question I have for you is, since this is in the context of our best practice sharing webinars, what other strategies have you used to make sure that you're up to date when it comes to immigration and refugee policy and programs? Because everyone's time is so limited, and at the same time, your job requires you to be on top of these sorts of changes so you can advise your clients appropriately and you can support them appropriately. So if we still have half an hour. So if you want, you can now pose any questions to me or answer these questions for the benefit of everyone. So I'm just going to see here, I have already some questions have been typed. Okay, I see here some people are asking if I can share the slides and if I can share The recording, definitely. So the slides and the recording will be shared with you, but they won't be shared by email directly. So basically, you will receive a follow-up email in 2 days. And in that follow-up email, there's a link to our project's wiki page. And on that wiki page, you will see the link to this recording as well as the slides. So definitely, they'll be shared with you. So it seems I have rambled through this presentation, but I'm wondering if anyone has any other ideas on how you stay up to date, or any strategies that you use to stay informed. Okay, Osama is asking, which one of those resources do you find is the most used recently? Osama, by most used recently, what do you mean? Do you mean so for me personally, for example, because of the nature of my job, I've signed up for all of them. But I have to admit the CCR does have a lot of traffic. I am personally interested in that, so I signed up with my personal email address for that one, because my work email inbox would be overloaded. But if you are purely interested in receiving a notification about any immigration and policy program changes from the government's level, then I would recommend you sign up for the RSTP's website on refugee sponsorship. If you're interested in more than just refugee sponsorship, then I would recommend you sign up for the IRCC email notification directly. I hope I answered your question, Osama. If not, feel free to clarify and add more. Okay, one of the other participants, Nandini, is sharing that they have used the Maytree Foundation. Yeah, that's also a very good source of information, I would say. It's perhaps, I myself haven't signed up for them, so I have no direct experience, so I can't comment on what I think about it, but I'm very much aware of their work, and that's definitely a great source of information. It's definitely credible as well, for sure. Nandini, do they have a newsletter that you have signed up for, or is that an email notification? Okay, a monthly newsletter, great. Yes, so Megan is asking about the Maytree Foundation. Okay, so somebody's asking, what is the best website to see past and projected numbers, demographics of refugees? Cassandra, that would be definitely the IRCC's website. What I will do is I'll add that to my slides so that when we put it up as a PDF, you can see the link there as well. It's definitely sometimes hidden, but it's public information. They definitely have 2 or 3 different websites, one where you can see actual statistics, the other about arrivals broken down by year and gender and population. And then you get also a different website link with information every year about their projected numbers of landings and maximum accepted applications and things like that. So I will add that as well. But I should have, yeah, the the CCR listserv, so the Canadian Council for Refugees, they also send this out whenever it's available. definitely, they have a lot of good information also for claimants, about claimants rather. So, acceptance rates by the IRBB and things like that. They sent that out on the list, on that listserv as well. Are there any other questions? Cassandra's asking, does IRCC data not include claimant demographics? Yes, it does include claimant demographics. Yeah, so somebody's asking if you have any questions, if you can follow up with me. Definitely, I think it seems nobody else has any questions. So this is a slide. You can see here our email address. It's checked by myself and by my colleague Lorraine. And the link to our wiki page where you will see recordings of this webinar, but also previous and future webinars are there. There's also a list of upcoming webinars you can see. And for those who are new to this webinar series, this came out of a project that we did at the end of last year, beginning of early this year. And as part of that project, we spoke with many frontline workers across Ontario to find out what gaps and challenges they experience in the context of working with resettled refugees. And some of you may have participated in one of our focus groups or interviews or surveys. So that information is also on this wiki page, that report and a summary of what we found was there. And one of the issues that came up is that frontline workers wanted more information, and they wanted to hear more from others about their practices and share their practices. So you will see recordings for previous webinars on other topics as well on that page. So I believe no one else has any questions. Something else came through. Okay. Yep. So if there are no other questions, thank you for joining us today and making the time. I know everyone's very busy and you sacrificing a lunch break. Really appreciate that, and I hope it's helpful to you. If you have any other questions, feel free to contact us, Settlement.Org. This is a short-term project, but so far we're still running until the end of March. So if you have any questions, please do feel free. If you have any topics that you think we should cover on a webinar basis, feel free to suggest that as well in an email. Just before we leave, as I mentioned, you will receive a follow-up email. Part of that, and even today when you leave this webinar, you will receive a pop-up, a survey actually that will pop up. It will ask you to provide some information or to answer some questions as a way for us to evaluate our webinars. And it's anonymous, and we would really appreciate it if you completed that. We don't have a webinar until mid-August, so that information will be on the wiki page as well. So and that will be about best practices on how to work with an interpreter when you have a client. So on behalf of Okasi and myself, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.